Welcome, everybody, to the Indie Game Lunch Hour, the best dang game dev podcast on the planet. Today, we are being joined by Cristian Jereghi about cinematic design, visual storytelling in game development.
The Indie Game Lunch Hour.
Welcome all to the Indie Game Lunch Hour, our live magical podcast in which we game developers the chance to hear stories of breaking in from industry experts, as well as directly ask them questions about their areas of expertise in the second half of each episode. As always, I'm your host, Willem Delventhal, the headmaster here at the Indie Game Academy, and joining me today is Cristian Jereghi. Cristian is an indie developer and the co-founder at Biopunk Labs and has worked on a bunch of big titles in the past, including Cyberpunk 2077. And Cristian here is to talk about cinematic design, telling stories visually in video games. Cristian, welcome to the show. You are at least on the record board of shortest turnaround time from being invited to talk on this show to actually being here. As we happened to have a chat together like 2 or 3 days ago. Yeah, absolutely. What are you having for lunch here today, Cristian?
Yeah, that was totally unexpected for me as well.
It was awesome. I mean, it was great. We happened to have somebody cancel, so we had an open slot. I was literally on the phone when one of our team members asked if anybody had a guest. And I was like, hey, want to just come on my podcast?
Yeah, and for you guys to get like how I was contacting William because we are in the process of starting our own studio, and William is like well known outside of the US as well. So I was just contacting him regularly about our new stuff, and then this invitation happened. So it was really cool and unexpected. Thank you, William.
Perfect. I mean, I'm grateful for you. This way, we've got somebody cool to talk to. You have some really interesting experience, and then also you are now a indie founder and working on getting money for your very first game, which is currently called Lost in Antarctica: The Story of a Karkovchanka, which is an old school, basically giant tractor to explore Antarctica, I believe. Is that right?
Yeah, this is true. This is like just to start. Like I was born in the Soviet Union, right? Basically, so this is a story about like the Soviet Antarctic expedition, which was taking part in the time of Cold War era. All this race. It was a race between Soviet Union and United States to the South Pole, and this is a game about this particular time where they reached the South Pole on the huge, based on the tank chases, like huge machines, monster trucks. I would say like they were getting there in a couple of weeks to reach the South Pole, and this is the game which shows this part of the history, pretty well forgotten history.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. When we were in the call together talking about this potential game, I happened to bring up how I always thought it would be interesting to make a game about the ski slope, like maintenance crew, which I don't know if anybody has been to a ski slope at night. They have these giant machines that flatten out the slopes every night. I always thought that would be kind of a cool little story to tell. I've heard about the Karkovchanka, but somehow I never thought of how cool of a game it would be. So this is a game about exploring the Arctic in a giant diesel engine and hopefully not dying, I assume.
So true.
Very cool. All right, now I have skipped ahead here a little bit because I just think it's a cool concept, and I want people to look up the Karkovchanka because it is actually a really cool story. This is real. This is not made up. Something that happened. This is the lesser well-known race between the USR and the US, I guess. Now, I would love to start with our original start story, our traditional start story, which is the origin story. Welcome to the show, Cristian. It's so great to have you here. Would you tell us where you are right now in the video game industry and how you got there?
Well, okay. So I started, like, as I mentioned, I was born in the Soviet Union. I spent half of my life probably living in Moscow, living in Kiev, and I was film director. I was documentarist. I was a TV director, and it turns out that a couple of years ago I had to join the army, and I was a military documentarist at the same time. And shortly after it, when I came back. I was like in this very cool point at your life, and you're just rethinking the whole thing. Like, what should I do next? And I was always passionate about video games all my life, since the childhood, and and I was thinking maybe I can try making this my new career. At that moment, I was almost 30, and I was like, Jesus, it scared me a lot, but I did my best. I tried so hard, and I was pretty much lucky that I was brought into the industry by the founders, one of them who have created Stalker, the original Stalker series, and who created the Metro Exodus series. My master, I was a Padawan of Andrei Prokhorov, who was one of the core founders of the Metro Exodus team. And I was lucky to start my career in there as cinematic designer. As for Eastern European game dev, everything, like, it was not very narrow experience, because we also were doing a lot of game designer stuff, level art stuff, and it was a great school overall. And after it, I was doing some solo projects for like game trailers, and then I was lucky to join Cyberpunk 2077 team, and specifically I worked on the Phantom Liberty DLC.
Wow, that's like a pretty storied career already. That is really exciting. I think the Metro Exodus series is one that a lot of people know. Cyberpunk, of course, is one that a lot of people know. Can you tell us a little bit about what you did on the Cyberpunk project?
Yeah, I was in the team of cinematic designers, the people who are behind creating basically all the dialogue scenes you can imagine in the game. So everything which is not exactly the combat and open world exploration, everything which touches the narrative part, and all the story sides, all the missions, we took our part. I was taking part in the main Golden Path quests and some side quests as well.
Amazing. That's a cinematic design is an area that I find pretty interesting because it sort of bridges the gap. You worked in film and documentaries for a time, and cinematic design is one that bridges the gap between that world and then the games world. It's also one that is becoming more common, more popular. There's like everything they did with the Mandalorian and the Unreal Game Engine, where they literally used the Unreal Game Engine to render backgrounds in like live as they were filming for the Mandalorian, and now that's commonly used in the film industry. So it's this area that's kind of becoming like gray between video games and the cinematic world. It's also becoming a big part of the reason that games succeed. Baldur's Gate 3, part of the reason anyway, that it did so well and is so well known is because of how potent, how effective their cutscene and dialogue system became. The cinematics really feel like you're there, you're able to get up close and personal to these characters, unlike their previous titles. So I would love from you, this is the topic of the day, a intro, a 101. What is cinematic design and how does the layman use it?
Right. So when people speak about cinematic design, there are basically two different directions you can think of. One is what's directly involving the cutscenes, like QTS scenes, combat scenes within the game. So the scenes which are made with the engine tools, with the animation libraries you have. And the second huge part of cinematic design is something which is involving these game promotional trailers, which are done differently, which are done by huge, big studios, and they use the animation pipelines, something you can expect from big studios which are creating like 3D animation. This is sometimes confusing because people who just want to start their path in and cinematics, sometimes they think that they are going to be to be this particular like directors for cinematics, but mostly in the industry you would expect that you would have to be game designer, technical specialist, all together with some cinematography skills to achieve this in-game cutscenes, because this is large area which requires a lot of technical experience on top of your like directing skills.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So I feel like there's two areas that we can go to here that our audience is going to care about. The first area is those who want to work in cinematic design, and the second area is those who are founders or working on their own projects that wish to incorporate some amount of cinematic design. So I'd love to talk about both of those, but maybe why don't we start with those who want to work in or around cinematic design? So somebody who wants to get started there, who wants to become a cinematic designer in the video game industry, how do you recommend they start? What are some of the most important things for them to practice and know? What's the 101 for working as a cinematic designer in games?
Well, so most of the job you can find in the industry right now, I think, is mostly about creating cutscenes in the game. So this would require from you some solid knowledge of the engines. At least if you start with the Unreal Engine, for example, you will build a solid foundation for yourself as a developer, because cinematic design involves a lot of visual scripting and combining the narrative, storytelling, like the camera and stuff, animations, with the gameplay itself. So if you can imagine Call of Duty title, for example, when you have this beautiful like film style cinematics, which are basically done by outsourced studios normally, and then before some combat starts, you have like in-game scenes. You have the scenes where your player is free to go around and talk to other characters. This is the part which would be done by you as a cinematic designer. And for it as well, you have to sometimes incorporate knowledge in animation. Sometimes it would require like working with mocap, working with actors, and generally overall, this is some mixture between technical skills, which would require a lot of cooperation, a lot of decision making, problem solving all the time, and this is really problem solving and multitasking, because you get thousands of different requests. You have to collaborate with a big team every day on hundreds of different situations to create a single, because while you're working on the scene, the art team can just move things around, and now your characters are going through some tables, some I don't know, so you have to address these issues all the time. So this really requires a lot of communication skills at all times. So if you're kind of more like if you don't like to talk a lot, this this would be a hard way for you.
I think unfortunately in the
So
game industry, if you don't like to talk a lot, there's not many roles that are for you.
yeah.
Like it's so collaborative. Okay, I heard out of that visual scripting and Unreal as far as some hard skills, and then multitasking, problem solving, and communication as some soft skills. Are there any other tools maybe or like tech pieces that you think people should be practicing if they want to work in this space?
Well, depending on the game size, I would say, and depending on the team size, mostly, it will require different stuff from you. Because if like this is AAA, it's a huge game, you will probably have somebody who is making breakdowns, animatics, some previews for you, and you will collaborate with them together. You don't need to have some solid painting skills or something, but if it's smaller team, it's small, there's a high chance that you will be involved in many more other cool processes, and you'll have to at least like learn how to sketch stuff, do some very simple animatics, cinematics to prove your concept, to show it off. You'll have to learn some stuff in level art, level design, lighting as well. So it would be a mixture of a huge amount of skills, and if as it goes in a larger scale of game, your role would be more narrow, I would say so.
Awesome. All right. So let's then talk about maybe the second part that I was talking about earlier, which is those who are running their own company one way or another. Either they're building even just like practice portfolio projects, or they're fully running something, trying to get it funded, trying to get some publisher money in the door. How does somebody, I think there's maybe sort of two questions here. How do they find the right person to work with for cinematic direction? And then secondarily, for those with a smaller budget, how do they incorporate some amount of cinematic direction if they can't afford to hire a team member?
Oh, so I was speaking about Unreal Engine, but of course it could be in Unity as well. But Unreal Engine is somewhat becoming more and more popular in the industry, and this and also it's quite similar to large proprietary engines you can imagine to work with. And for a smaller team as well, it incorporates a lot of great stuff and some great tools which are to create fine cinematics, fine cutscenes for indie games, which is very important because it's a combine. It's like industry combine, which can create some additional tools. You will be able to record mocap on your or iPhone, and it will be a suitable quality for some indie game in certain cases. So this is why this tool is one of the preferred, I would say, for people who are going to look into industry or going to make their own games. And luckily, as time passes, we have more and more tools, which like AI tools, which allow us to create some inverse kinematic animations, to create some animatics, just I don't know, controlling characters by ourselves and recording this as an animation, which is which is a really cool option in some packages like iClone or something. It's not an advertising. No, I'm not getting paid for it. Just
Awesome. Yeah, that's I mean, it sounds like really one of the biggest things here is for people who want to work in the space or incorporate some amount of cinematic design into their games. You're heavily in favor of Unreal Engine. Is that the case?
well, I don't have this solid preference. I worked with many engines, including like huge AAA engines, and well, mostly in general, if you compare timeline in Unreal, if you compare it to like Unity sequencer, Unity timeline, it will be pretty much the same. But integrations is something which is important for you, because you would like to you will have a lot of problems incorporating some like skeletal animations, like characters, into Unity mostly right now. With Unreal, luckily you have pretty more tools for doing that. And let's be honest, for smaller scale games, for mobile games, you don't need all this toolkit. You don't need to integrate like full skeletal animation, mocap, or integrate some animations into the engine. Yeah, you will have much simpler tasks for it. So and at this point, of course, Unreal is not the only one solution. You can do this in Unity as well, or in some other engines, and you will be fine to go.
Mhm. Yeah, traditional answer there. I have seen an experience for myself is like for those big budget, those AAA games that are meant to be hyper realistic, have heavy 3D elements. Unreal is the way to go. Um, that said, and then Unity and Godot sort of have their own advantages. I would imagine that Godot is by far the worst for like pure traditional cinematic design. Um, that said, though, from my understanding, there's still cinematic design even in non 3D games and even in simplified games. Like I'm imagining the, RPG Maker, the camera pans over and shows a top-down isometric character who's just like standing there, and then there's a piece of text moving across the bottom of the screen, and they're like, giving a speech about how they're the big bad. Like that's still cinematic design. That still has somebody's eye behind it. That's correct, yeah?
Yeah, that's totally correct. Well, in wider understanding of what cinematic design is, because basically, cinematic design is something which should support its directing. It's something which should support your narrative, but it can be done in very different ways. A visual novel, an anime story can be directed, and if you even have just the still shots, you'll have just 2D art. It still requires some part of direction in some form, yeah, to make when you combine 2D animations, when you combine some audio, you combine music, voiceover all together. It's still a cinematic design, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. I actually, that line that you just gave us, cinematic design is directing, I think is a really great, simple definition for people who are trying to understand what you do and what this space does. People, especially in the indie sphere, people are going to touch their finger to this without it being their whole role. When I was working on escape rooms for ImView, for instance, I like delivered a couple of storyboards that were super ugly, but gave our animators an idea of how the story should flow. These little baby cutscenes. So as with many fields in this space, there's a wide variety, a wide degree of how intense you can get with it. I would love to give a couple of minutes here before we move to our community questions to talk about Lost in Antarctica. Could you give us your pitch version, your 60 seconds of what this game is and what you're trying to create?
All right. Great. I was just going to continue talking about cinematic design because it's, but you just catch me. You caught me right here. All right. So, um, this is a game about where your character is a Soviet pilot who has survived a crash in the heart in the 1950s, and your only ultimate goal is to survive these crazy Antarctic conditions, the crazy amount of cold, which comes up to 120 Fahrenheit or 80 Celsius, minus 80 Celsius, below zero. And in this game, you're operating this unique Soviet polar cruiser built on a basis of T-54 tank, which has a room inside for 8 people, and you're moving through the Antarctica. Your route is basically your nearest populated base is like 2,000 miles away, and you have to survive, and you have to get away along with your crew free.
Cool. Can you give us maybe give me like a beautiful corner? Like what's something that might happen? Like maybe a tread breaks or something. Walk me through a little interesting moment that might happen in Lost in Antarctica.
Well, and in the game, you would explore different abandoned bases and different hidden bases, which were like secretly built during the Cold War. You will be able to explore the infamous Vostok station, which is located in the South Pole itself. And just a sneak peek, the game would be happening at the same time as this first Soviet launch of Gagarin, and you will have to do something with that. You will have to you will have a quest which will require something from you.
That's awesome. Do you mind if I drop just one of the pictures from the deck into the chat so people can see this big diesel machine?
Yeah, I think you can drop this one with a plane probably.
Okay.
I was not like I was really not prepared for this today. I must say this is a
Give you
first first ever public announcement of any kind, which I did. We were kind of hiding a bit, and what's cooking up.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
but I decided this is just the perfect spot because I'm from Ukraine. Our team is mostly from Ukraine, and some guys are from the United States, and we are looking forward to share our very unique experience. And we are super excited to see how Western audience is reacting to this, because this story as a whole is something we were it's like being Indiana Jones digging for some hidden secrets of the past when you're looking through the documents which are like 16 years old, and you're trying to find some really cool stuff to make this historically realistic. And you're thinking how Western audience will take how they will like it. And I'm super curious how this can go.
Makes a ton of sense to me. Like my designer senses are tingling. It would be a really fun game to work on. I feel like there's going to be a lot of really exciting little moments. There was that what was the indie game that got released maybe 2 years ago that was like it's got super super basic, almost like 8-bit 3D graphics, where you're in a submarine deep under the ocean. Anybody remember what I'm talking about?
Um, well, I can remember only U-boat game, and previously the Silent Hunter, if it comes to submarine stuff.
It's not Dave the Diver, Joker bases, but great guess. Not
Oh,
Subnautica. Maybe
David, yeah, it's a great game.
great game. That is not what I'm talking about. I'll maybe look it up and add it here in a second. Where can people follow you if they're excited to hear more about this? This is, by the way, this is Christian's startup. He is currently trying to raise money for this game. This is something that he is now working on after having worked in the AAA space. So this is now, his next step. Hopefully that's inspiring to all of you who are thinking about doing this yourself. But where can they follow if they want to hear more about this game?
I can drop can I drop a link to our Patreon maybe, or our Discord server? I don't know which would work best.
Why don't you drop both? And then for those who are listening this episode, you can find it in the descriptions down below. We'll put both of those links in there. All right.
All right.
While you're doing that, I think.
Question of the day.
It's time for the question of the day, where we reiterate one of the most important points that we've learned from our guest in order to help you learn it better. I'm going to ask a really simple one today. First person to type this in chat gets 3 House Cup points. What is cinematic design? Listening, speak it out loud. Chocolate. I don't think that's right, Mister. Good guess. What is cinematic design? It is directing. Thank you, Wendy. Wendy, you get 3 House Cup points. I think you're a cleric, Wendy. Is that right? Yes, indeed. I like that because it's simple. Obviously, Victor, who the hell is that? That's the audience member. Obviously, Christian gave us a lot of tips about how to get into cinematic design. Learning Unreal Engine is a great place to start, especially for any 3D games. Visual scripting, the technical skills. You can always look up technical skills for your profession by just looking at job listings. That's one of the simplest pieces of advice I always give. And then, of course, you've got some soft skills to master, including communication, problem solving, and multitasking. But yeah, I love that nice, simple definition. If you're unsure exactly about what cinematic design is or what you'll be doing in that space, cinematic design is directing, which also I'm sure is going to be appealing to a lot of people because we all wish we were big, fancy directors. Okay, it is time to move to our community questions. Amani has our very first question. Amani, I neglected to ask if you want to come on stage. I'm going to read it for you to keep this flowing. Amani asks, what is the best thing programmers collaborating with you can do to make their jobs easier?
Great question. Thank you. So most of the cinematic designers always require some input from programmers, and what involves the game toolkits for your work. So basically, like some combines like Unreal have most of the features you can expect, but when it comes to the further progression, you would require, especially if it goes to some branching cutscenes, QTA scenes, you'd require a lot of collaborating with some with your programmer or with the developer and blueprints to combine stuff together. So that's basically the input we always require for some specific specific tools like calling the events during combat, making like decision making, like timers and all this kind of stuff.
Awesome.
Did I answer the question?
Did that answer the question for you, Imani? Does that sound good?
Yeah.
While Imani thinks about it, Rick, why don't you jump in with your pick? Actually, either of those questions is good.
Yeah, my first question is actually an expansion upon the answer that he just gave. So as a programmer, like let's say I'm creating tools to be used by the cinematic designer, the ones you're describing right now. What can you speak more granularly about the exact tools that you would want to have in your utility belt to say like, okay, I would like to have this kind of moment. These are the most important things to definitely have.
Well, it really depends on the task and the genre. Because, for example, if you go to the games with branching cutscenes, or like the huge games like Cyberpunk, which by design have player movement, which is not limited by just the camera, because we can speak about two types of cutscenes. When you have the camera and you limit the player, so he's basically sitting and watching Netflix, while he's playing. And second type of game design is something you can expect from Witcher or Cyberpunk, where the player can go everywhere. So you, as cinematic designer, in certain cases, must secure all the possible ways the player can break the game. If the player follows the character, this most anticipated type of scenes, when you have to follow someone talking. In these cases, you will require a lot of integration with some specific animation, like securing animation situations, securing the stuff when player can just start looting and, I don't know, go away during the cutscene, and there you would require some help from your friendly game designer. For me, as for cinematic designer, most important is having these synchronization tools for audio and video, and working with some IK animations, for example, when you can something can happen during the scene, and this can affect movement of the characters. This for me, this was always the complicated spot, and I requested some help from our programmers.
All right, that's awesome.
So, the question for you, Rick?
Yeah. So you want the ability to, for two different cinematic modes, moving the camera, like all of the camera potential motions, and the player stands still. But then in some cases, you need the ability for the players to move and some kind of system to integrate for that. Then
yeah, I'll also add just very shortly, very briefly, that the most important thing is calling the events, like anime events, VFX, sound at the same time while you're playing the cutscene and watching it and testing it. So calling these events and this communication with the code is one of the most important probably tools you can aid with as a programmer.
all right, so event-driven tools.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Let's go forward.
Boys, we got even more questions for you. The next one is from Joker of Aces. Joker of Aces asks, with games where the cutscenes are in gameplay, due to the game being high graphic already, would you approach the thematic cutscene more of an art movie director or a level designer or character animator?
So, like as I mentioned before, like in Metro, in Eastern European, probably in Europe, some of European games, your role as cinematic designer could be not that narrow as in high. Like huge companies and huge production cycles, like Ubisoft or somewhere. So you probably you will have some opportunity to work with level art, work with lighting design.
Okay.
Uh, and yeah, so for for bigger companies, you would probably doing your own stuff, and then that's it.
Yeah, it's sort of an interesting one. The for those, this podcast is obviously the indie game lunch hour. So most people in this room are indies, which means they're working on teams that typically don't go above maybe 12 people in size. It's definitely interesting as you get bigger, the fact that roles can sometimes blend together a little bit. I'm going to ask one of your questions for you, Rick, because I think it's kind of a great time to input it. For instance, how is a narrative designer different from a cinematic designer? How do those two people work together? Do they work together? What does that look like?
Well, you can shortly describe this as a working as a script writer working with a film director altogether. So a narrative designer, well, depending on the game, of course, but mostly I address myself narrative designer as a script writer. And you know why film directors are always not the best fit for cinematic design? Just purely, I didn't see any film directors directing mock-up in my career at all, because film directors they work they have their own vision, and they don't work in this huge amount of iterations, and iterations are the key cornerstone for them when they come to game design, because you have to iterate thousands of times. So you can work in one scene for several months, for several years. You can work like 2 years on one scene, or some scenes simultaneously, but you will just develop it from scratch and change it like 1,000 times. And working with narrative designer there makes you you basically you must collaborate, because it's an evolving structure. So as narrative designer, he can change narratives, can change some design could change in the process, and you have to adjust, and this is the most complicated, the most stressful actually part of our job, because we have to adjust all the time till the end, until the like final stages of making the game. You adjust, you change something. If you have directed the scene in some way, and then the whole scene can change, because dialogue are changing, and narrative designer comes to you and says, oh, sorry, we have to cut half of it, and we just have to make it differently, and you start thinking how to get out of this together.
Yeah. I think anybody who's in the design field at all, and there's so many different roles under the design field. But yeah, if you want to work in any of the design fields, and really just if you want to work in games, so much of your work is going to be adjusting and changing your designs. It is not there's basically no job in the world where you're going to write down a super cool thing and then that's exactly how it will get implemented. Things always change depending on players, depending on what's capable in your team, depending just on like general feedback in your team. Maybe somebody on your team has a cooler idea that you didn't think of until they happen to see your first design. Being able to adjust and not just being like willing to adjust, but having that be like a fun part of the process, because it is, will definitely be a part of your job.
Yeah, you just have to understand that this is your way of this is the way, simply quoting Mandalorian. So this is the way. If you try making a cutscene or cinematic for a game, and you'll think that okay, I'll do a great job right now. I'll push the limits, and this is how it will be. You will receive a lot of stress later, because things would go wrong. Things always go wrong. Everything changes. Everything requires new iterations, edits. So always think about this as an evolving structure, evolving storytelling, not as a final finished product you will be able to do just from scratch.
Love that. That's a really good one. This is an evolving. Games in general are an evolving art form. They always change as we adjust. By the way, completely random. Earlier, I mentioned a deep underwater submarine game by an indie company. I'm thinking of Iron Lung, which you can look up if you wish. It is a horror game about being in a submarine where you basically can't see out of the submarine. It's kind of genius. And this reminds me maybe of one potential direction for your Konkov Shanka. All right, Rick, do you want to ask a second question? Your choice.
Yeah,
Time for
sure.
probably 2 or 3 more.
Yeah. So, as a cinematic designer, you'll be working on a team trying to make sure that you're telling the right story that will be written by presumably a team of writers. What is your ideal starting point in the documentation and directive that you're receiving from the people who are managing the overall narrative versus you are handling and just conveying a cinematic moment properly? Like, what's your best starting documentation? What does that look like?
Let's firstly tell that there's never a proper story. Everything you make is it. You cannot just say this is exactly the proper story, the only way. There are multiple ways of telling the story. So this is the beauty probably and the art of the creating some attractive storytelling that nobody can value this exactly. There always be people who like and dislike what's going to be in the result. And technically speaking, when coming to the documentation, I would say there are different forms and different standard forms of documentation, like game script, like dialogues and stuff, which are basically more or less the same as you would if you Google on the first page, like how these scripts for movies are written, it would be pretty much the same. When it comes to like branching structures, we work with artists, we work with discuss stuff in the same way using some mind maps and Miro, so we are just understanding the logic of the scene, but basically we use the same, pretty much the same standard documentation. But what's probably most important is that you would have to this is a game of choices. So creating a good trailer, creating a good cinematics is always coming to the editing process of kicking throwing out what's useless, what's not important, and choosing what's most important, most attractive, and works best for your game. The strong narrative can it's really important. I would say it's a very low chance that even a great cinematic designer can create a beautiful like a cool narrative which will engage players if the narrative design with the basis would be poor, really. So I would only recommend to have narrative and cinematic pretty much at the same level, because the second thing which comes into my mind is consistency. It's very important. Like it's more important than any formal kind of documentation. It's consistency between your game style, your game rhythm, your game the way you're engaging your player, and narrative and visual storytelling. Because if you have absolutely stuck like cinematics and you have a game which doesn't have that amount of action or rhythm, it would suck. It would never work.
So it sounds like you want to sync the tone between what's going on during the normal gameplay and then the tone that the cinematics that are like the rewards that the player works towards at the end of each level.
Yeah.
Make sure
And if you Of course, and if you try to, usually specialists in this area have some sort of like background which will you understand, which will make you easier to understand what to expect from them. Because if you ask a horror maker, cinematic designer to your toon, I don't know, beautiful toon game, you will have a beautiful toon game with weirdly appearing horror style cutscenes normally. So you'll have to find the person which will fit your style.
Okay, so it's just understanding more the story that needs to be told rather than receiving a list of like things to understand about the cinematic. You just want to be more interwoven in the greater narrative.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool.
And that's
Thank you.
something that I think that is absolutely. Thank you, Rick, for the question. I think that's something that is true for that is one of the great challenges of game development, because there are so many people, especially in those larger teams, there are so many people telling the story in their own unique way. So the level designer is telling the story via environmental cues, as well as actual like level experience. The combat designer is telling the story via how difficult this combat is and some of the actual moments that might happen in combat. The cinematic designer is telling the story via cutscenes and actual cinematic moments. The narrative designer is maybe giving like an overarching story and some actual dialogue. So this is why we talk about communication being such a huge part of game development, because it can't just be I design a great cinematic that makes the player feel this way. It needs to be I design a cinematic that makes the player feel this way because this is what we overarching as a whole team are trying to tell.
Yeah. And I would just add on top of that one advice for the developers: never treat your cutscenes as something which you would add in the very end of your production. Instead, think how you would integrate and iterate them, starting from very scratch, starting from very simple, I don't know, sketches which you just put into the places in the game. Otherwise, you will be in trouble in the end of your production cycle if you just try to add the cutscenes and cinematics after all the other work would be done. So think about it as an integral part of the process, not something, not a cherry on top. It's just one of your ingredients, and you must add it in a proper time from the beginning to make it look nice.
But yeah, that's another one that I know I keep saying this, but that's another one that applies to everyone. Basically, no aspect of game design should just be left until the very end. You should be thinking and talking about more or less everything the whole time. All right, I've got one last question for you, and then we're going to wrap up for the day. I'm gonna do Joker Vase's question here and then expand upon it a little bit. So, would you ever consider making a cutscene inside Blender and then inputting it into the game? I've seen a large uptick in short animated movies in Blender lately. I'm gonna extend that out to not just talk about Blender, but instead to talk about like in-game cutscenes versus like pre-rendered cutscenes. When are the appropriate times to use those two tools?
Well, personally, I have nothing against Blender itself. As a 3D artist, I do some stuff and even concept arts with help of Blender. So it's a great tool. And I don't think it's ever possible to create a cutscene, because as we discussed earlier, the cutscene is an integral part of your game, which is done within the game engine, basically. But speaking about cinematics, yeah, it could be everything. It could be 3D Max, Maya, whatever. For Cinema 4D, it can be I don't know, cutscene, which cinematic, which is built on 2D layers in Adobe After Effects or something, and it would be still a cinematic, which comes from other software and which is integrated in your game when you need this kind of tool to tell your story.
When do you think is the best time to use an in-game cinematic, like we're just having the characters walk around and have some dialogue pop up, versus having a pre-rendered, like this is actually a separate video that we actually created? What's the best time to do those two things?
Well, cutscenes are expensive, and cinematics are mostly even twice more expensive or 5 times more expensive for YouTube projects. So this amount depends on your budget firstly, but it's can tell that like there's choice, like should I use cutscene or cinematic here, but when you have to put to show your story, just to cut in, break in, and show that something is changing. You can use cinematic for trailers. You can use cinematic for the beginning of the game, for final of the game. But cutscenes are like something which is combined with your gameplay, and then they add 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 some action to your gameplay. They help you to move the player to the specific position. They're helping you mostly. So and it depends on your game style. Like games like Witcher or Cyberpunk, they're built differently right now. They're using these different techniques and more complicated techniques without limiting the player movement. But normal classic storytelling techniques usually combine both. So.
Awesome. Love it. All right. This is that is the last question for the day. So before we say goodbye, we like to do two things here, Christian. The first one is to assign some homework. So what is something that the audience can do in the next week that'll take them about an hour to practice some of what we talked about here today?
Well, you can exercise and just create a simple still. It's called stillmatic. If you're at least somehow familiar with 3D engines, you'll just need a doll. You can do it using I don't know your toys in from your bedroom, or you can use it like make some take doll from Unreal Engine or a Unity character, and just create a small dialogue between two characters with beginning, middle, and some outcome in the end. It could be like 30 seconds, but this is a great try to use just still images and just combine them in a sequence, and you see how that builds up all together. Because remember that the main thing is that two frames, like 1+1 in the movies and or cinematics, is free, because two pictures together are creating a third meaning.
Amazing. I love that, actually. That's a really simple, actionable piece of homework. So I want all listeners to give this a shot. Create yourself a cinematic using stillmatics, using still images. A couple of pictures. You can take pictures of some action figures. You can use some 3D models in your favorite game engine. You can sketch this out on a piece of paper. Give us a little bit of a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Post it to LinkedIn. Be brave. Get a little practice in. You can tag us, the Indie Game Academy. You can tag Christian. Let me make sure I'm saying your last name right before I
Yeah, and I'll just very shortly that most of the times you will be assigned some kind of test work if you try to go into the industry, and they would just give you the script for it. It would be like 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minute script, and will be basically the same. You would have to make the stillmatic or small animatic, and that's how they determine if you are good fit for the job.
So this is like practicing actually breaking into this role too, which is even better. So tag Cristian Jereghi. We'll put, of course, their name will be in the chat, and their LinkedIn will be down below as well. And you can tag myself, Willem, and we'll tell you that your stuff is cool. If it's a little bit too much for you to post it to publicly on LinkedIn, which we encourage you to, because LinkedIn is only more and more important to land jobs. But if that's too much for you, you can also, of course, come here to the Indie Game Academy Discord server and post it there. All right, before we say goodbye, Christian, are there any last words of wisdom you would like to give, or anything you'd like to plug here at the end of the episode?
Oh, the words of wisdom. Always think about consistency. Always think what would be the best fit for you or a game style, for a game genre. Look into examples, learn references. If you want to make a trailer or a cutscene, try to look to other guys, and try not to follow just the first solution which comes to your mind. Try to be creative and brave to explore new techniques.
Love that. Fantastic. And we plugged Lost in Antarctica earlier. We're going to put the link to the Patreon as well as the Discord server down below. So check those out in the description. Go and support a fellow indie developer now striking out on their own. And yeah, this has been a fantastic episode, Christian. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Willem.
Absolutely. This is, as always, this podcast happens once a week, every single Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern time. I almost forgot our time. So feel free to swing by, join us for the next one, ask your own questions live. And of course, if you enjoyed the episode, we ask that you send it along to just one other person who might enjoy learning from Christian here. All right, that's going to be it. Bye, everybody.